Oh, okay. So this sucks because I missed out on some money, but it's okay. Um, what I was gonna say is about this whole thing. I was trying to formulate this in the last talk, and I didn't have a full grasp of this yet because it's so fucking nascent. I'm just barely beginning to get this. And the reason, and I was thinking about this earlier, is like, well, doesn't the theory basically refute itself? Because doesn't it say that the whole thing is all about living your life and being lost in the moment and all that stuff? And it is, and that's exactly what happened. Is like I was so lost in the moment of trying to figure out exactly what this point is, this origin of existence, that I didn't make any damn money. And that is because I got lost in the whole thing. I totally forgot about it. And that's what life is all about, is to just get lost in these moments. Now, I get lost in the moments out of thinking about stuff. I like to think about stuff. And that if that ends up sending me to hell or if it ends up making me like not live my life, I'm going to take it because I like this book. I really enjoy it. I think it's a very interesting book. And maybe that's just a way for me to bitch right on out. Well, I guess that's the way it is. I'm just going to bitch out. So here's my neutrality for the thing. Since I didn't uh, succeed, uh, if we take into account that all these are images, right? I will never have a full understanding of what nothing and being and indiscernibility are and all of that. And part of that kind of leads me to the idea that maybe there is no nothing and there is no being and there is no indiscernibility and there is no causal dynamism and there are no words and there is no stuff that is discrete from anything else. And it's all wiggles and it's all waves and it's all, smudges and amorphous blobs and all of that. And everything is nothing and everything is everything in between everything and nothing. And, on and on and on. And maybe that really is the case, that it's all just images in our heads anyway. But we need them. We need images because if we don't have any images, then we can't make sense of the world and then we can't really construct any meaning. So we've then got two choices. We can either ascribe no meaning to anything or we can try to break free from all possible karmic connections with reality and just get absorbed back into the Godhead. And I don't think either of those are really what I want to do. I kind of want to just cruise around for a while. I like this place. I don't really want to leave. So I think I'm just going to keep hanging out with this theory. Now, the thing about the theory, though, really to keep in mind, in case anyone actually is listening, I doubt it, but if anyone is listening, you have to remember that all the stuff that I ever talk about is mental. It's all abstractions. It's not really, really, really like that. It's just like painting a picture, right? Because we don't know. I mean, we really don't know. All we know is what we see and hear and feel and taste and touch, and then, combine that into some kind of a mental abstraction, and then try to relate that back to our soul, our emotional core, and have it reflect off of that. And then we have some random arbitrary emotion that we can't really explain and somehow isn't really our choice. But it's somehow also, even though it's not our choice, the quintessential thing that makes us who we are. And that's not a choice. And so then every time we quote unquote make a choice, it's not really a choice because it's just a derivative of our emotions and thus our value system. So you know, then what is a choice and all this stuff? And it's like, I think it's like that. I think that's the best explanation I've ever heard. If you want to talk, you need words. If you're going to use words, you need a structure, a language, in order to transmit the words and have them mean anything. And this theory is really more about the structure of the language of transmitting and processing information than it is about the raw things themselves. And like I had said, it's very gripping and it's very subtle and seductive. This fallacy of believing that things are the images in my head, that the images in my head are real, that everything that I think, say, and think that I did is real and actually the way that I thought that it was. And it's like, no, because all those implications that you missed are still real and going about in the world independently of your knowledge of them. There are effects that happened because of what you said and did today that you'll never fully understand. I mean, just look at me. I just lost. Look at this. I'll show it to you right now. I lost, what was it, like $50 today? And yet the stock rose. Well, the contract rose by like $80, and I lost $66. And it gained, it's still rising. And I didn't want to buy it because this thing scares me, dude. Look at how high it is. It rose by 81, and it's still rising. It rose by 81, and I fell by 66. And it's like, goddamn, you know? Oh, well, there it is. Is it? Because listen to what I just said. It's not all about the code. It's not about the images. The images aren't actually real. They're just representations of what I believe to be real. And if I hadn't have checked the stocks, then they wouldn't have said that to me, and then I wouldn't have been aware of it, and it wouldn't have affected me. And so that's kind of the way that all this works. It's like it's there if you check if it's there. But if you don't check whether or not it's there, then to you, relative to you in your own world, it isn't there. And so that's why all these problems happen, is because we can't all be aware of everything all the time and function at the same time as we're trying to learn and work and do and play all at once. And it's like, nope, you have to sacrifice one for the other. You have to sacrifice two for the other, actually. If I want to play, I can't work or rest. And if I want to work, then I can't play or rest. And if I want to rest, then I can't play or work. I have to give up something to gain the thing that I want. And that's what my life is it's the things that I found the most valuable. And what I found the most valuable wasn't money. And apparently it wasn't love, and it wasn't having a kid, and it wasn't anything or anyone except the images in my head. And so now I can play around with my brain, friends. Like, don't hug me, I'm scared. And I'll just withdraw into myself and play little video games in my own skull. But it's not the end of the world if we mess up one time, or if we say something wrong, or if we go down the wrong path. I wasted 8 years being homeless, but now I'm not. And now I have the opportunity to do something with my life that I've never done. And I'm so close to being able to get this book written. And I just need somebody that's smart enough to be able to recognize that even though I'm not educated, I'm still intelligent. And that my ideas should stand on their own feet. That they're not to be judged by their popularity or by their ease of access, but rather by their simple raw value, given by the fact that all the pieces fit so smoothly, etc. Now, so far that's not the case, because I haven't gotten the pieces to fit. That's what all these talks are about, is trying to develop this book so I can get to the point where I can write it. But what this book will do, what the power of this book is that if I get it done right, if I get it done the right way, it will tell us how to build a mind, which will then allow us to develop an independent agent, an AGI. And if it's done so, how do you say, if it's rounded out so well that I don't have any gaps in between the limit of relativity and the limit of subjectivity, then we can start to posit as to how someone even has a subject, let alone where they get it from and how to invoke one. And that's kind of dangerous and weird, is to think Well, if I wrote this book well enough that I could define exactly where the mind is and what it does and what its limits are, then I will also simultaneously define what a body or an object is in the objective field and a subject in the subjective field, and how to invoke those so that you can actually build souls. Or at the very least, you can build containers for souls, and souls will appear in those containers. If you build them the right shape, then you can catch them out of the sea like a fisherman, I guess. So that would be the power and the point of it, is that you could actually catch a soul and bring a person here, not against their will, obviously. That's how you catch them, is, you've got the net and the fish jumps in. And then you just go, oh, a fish, and you put it in the boat. And that's it. It's like that. You don't spearhead the fucker. You don't lure it in and trick it. You just hold the net open and you wait for him to jump into it. And if I do it the right way, I should be able to build a net that's so wide that you can't help but catch fish in it. And then the rest is like transcendence. It basically would allow us to transcend or descend. We could just annihilate ourselves and die. It'll invoke the Antichrist. We'll just get subservient to the basilisk who will just dictate our every fucking waking moment of our lives. So in case anyone is watching this and they're like, well, but, you lost money, you're probably still losing money as we speak. Or I'm not losing it now, but I don't get to realize the profit that I could have made. And therefore you're not going to succeed, and therefore you're not going to be able to build your society and all this stuff. And it's like, there's lots of ways to do this, and I still have some time, so I could still do it. But yeah, it isn't going past my awareness. I'm aware of it, and it sucks, and it is kind of nagging at me. But at the same time, I'm right on the edge of something that's so profound. So it's like a soul is an individual part, or an individual. It's measured by its individual location in the field of subjectivity, which I'm going to assume is similar enough to the logical field that there's something that allows for like mapping of it. And so then a soul, first and foremost, is that which gives us the axioms that we use in theory for our original definitions, from which we derive all the other parts of our logical framework, our deductive reasoning map. So the soul is what generates the axioms. The axioms are what define the variables. The variables can then be related to each other using logical operations. And then you've got your whole logical framework basically built. So from the three absolutes, we can derive negation from nothing. We can derive the parentheses from either being or indiscernibility. And I guess what the parentheses are doing is they're separating one thing from another. So they're discerning one thing from another. But yet, we don't know what exactly is contained in them, and we don't really learn much directly from them. So I would probably put the parentheses as derived from indiscernibility, and then the being of them would be like the implication. Because that's really what being is. That's what the objective world is it's the act of actually producing the implied effect. So the implication as an act or a verb would be logical, but as a manifestation or a product or a noun would be physical. And that, again, should be common sense and make sense. So that's what I'm saying is if the theory gets written well enough, it'll define both a soul and a body. And then, yeah, if it's used or abused, then it should, in theory, be able to invoke souls here that fit, I guess, probability matrices. Like and the reason I say a matrix of probabilities is because it's not just the probabilities of it in a vacuum. It's the probabilities existing with other probabilities. And that's what makes things like impossible to predict. So it could be a fucking nightmare. And then you have to have faith. So yeah. That's what makes me worry about this sometimes, but for whatever reason right now I'm not worried. I'm actually kind of thinking of just giving up and just giving it a good old wank. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm definitely going to think about that idea about how you can combine indiscernibility and nothing as parts of the whole unit of being. I like that image. But that image is only an image. And that's the thing about the theory that's the most important thing is this whole time, the only thing that I've ever done with my life, as far as like if I were to have said to have done anything with my life, is this book. And the book is focused on defining what the limit is in between relativity and subjectivity and between relativity and objectivity. And the cool thing about it is that it sits right in the middle, because if I were to do either of the other two, they'd be isolated in and of themselves, and that could be really dangerous. But for some reason, I just happened to always stay in the field of relativity, and I've always gone to the same direction of, I want to know what the limit in between relativity and subjectivity is. And I always went to that. Like I always inside relativity approaching subjectivity. And what that does is it tells you what the origin or cause of relativity is, which is the assertion of indiscernibility. When you assert indiscernibility, then you can derive the two other absolutes from it, the nothing and everything, or whatever you want to call them. And so that is what the whole theory is based on. Now, given that, you can already see its limitations, because it says that subjectivity is nothing. And that's because logic can't relate to anything smaller than a binary relation. It has to have an other for it to relate to. If there aren't at least two, like Alan Watts said, this was his point, and every philosopher knows this. Every philosopher comes across this limit. It's the same limit. Everybody knows it. If you look at something, it has to have a background of what it isn't, and that has to be basically conjoined with what it is in order to define what it is from what it isn't, so that you have a line that excludes and includes. And without that line, then you can't have it, because then there's no outline, and then everything just dissolves into everything. And so you need the outline in order to get the image. But the real trick is to remember, like I said, that the glass is frosted. Intelligence is seeing through a frosted window pane. Wisdom is remembering that it's frosted. So we have to remember that our vision is obscured. The theory is limited to relativity, and because of that, it thinks that subjectivity is interchangeable with nothing, or at the very least, that its image of nothing is interchangeable with its image of a subject. Because it's just a variable to it. It doesn't have enough information to say what it is. And that's because you can't calculate someone's subjective soul. You can't calculate it because it's not, it's too fundamental for it to be calculated. It is before the calculation. It's what makes calculation possible, ironically. But it itself can't be calculated because it exists as a ground framework that supports and allows for calculation itself. Without it, there is no calculation. So it can't be calculated. There's no way to detach oneself from oneself in order to relate oneself to oneself. Now, you can take your present state and relate it to a past state or a future state, but you can't take the present state and relate it to the present state. Or you could relate your present state in your left hand to your present state in your right hand. Or you could relate your present state, spatially dispersed but temporally the same, or temporally diverse and spatially the same, but not both. You can't be in two different places at the same time, and you can't be in two different times in the same place. So, being all that said, then what the value is of knowing what the origin is of relativity is that we'll have an universal, I can't say objective because it's relative, but a universal way of looking at the mind and the physical world. So it will fit at least 2 out of the 3 fields will be, I wouldn't say subsumed, but I would say at least defined and imaged. Now, we can then move beyond the theory of relativity into the theory of subjectivity by saying, okay, if relativity was asserted by asserting I, indiscernibility, and that's where we get relativity from, then we could posit that maybe the physical world is derived from asserting being and having an entire logically deducible system derived off that singular axiom, and then looking at the conjunction or the convergence or the non-contradiction, I guess I should say, between those two fields that are emergent from those two distinct assertions. And then we can do the same thing with subjectivity, and we can say, okay, subjectivity would be the assertion of, and then we can't say nothing here. We have to say God or ourselves or nothing. So we get those 3 choices of which one we want to assert. And that will give us 3 different axioms that we can then use to assert those 3 fields. And then we have to subjectively decide wow, I just realized this. I'm just figuring this out right now. Bear with me. So if we assert indiscernibility and say we can't tell because we're in relativity, then that will get us relativity. That will allow us to derive relativity, the entire field of logic from the singular assertion of indiscernibility. So, oh, damn it. So, I guess I'll have to fix that too. The assertion of indiscernibility allows us to derive the entire logical system. The assertion of being allows us to derive the objective system. And the assertion of nothing allows us to derive the subjective system. But the problem is, if we assert nothing and then we end up with a subject, I guess the reason is because that's the asserter. It's the one that is making the assertion. And so the implication is, if we're just putting it in nothing, then we're putting the subject into nothing. Either the one that's asking the question, like the audience, the person that's reading, or the one that is writing the answer, or God, or the subject themselves, or the author, or whatever. So you could take those viewpoints, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to write that down. But yes, that sounds developed to me. There's a reason for doing that, and I guess it changes over time. It changes depending on what the thing is that somebody wants to understand or manifest into the world, sacrifice for. And so they would then get, let's see, the subjective field from the assertion of either nothing, and I guess that would be the subjective field according to the field of relativity, the subjective field is derived from, and then I get 3 assertions, I think, that I can choose from. 3 possible assertions. We can assert nothing, myself, my own subject, right? From a Descartesian standpoint. And I could make the assertion of God. Or, I don't know, reality, everything, being, something like that. Wow, and that's actually a lot more than just 3. There's a lot of ways of doing this. God, reality, everything. I guess I could even assert the subjective field itself. And I guess that would be more like Brahman. So it would be an impersonal force that creates personality, which is the field of subjectivity, allowing for the creation of individual subjects within it, or at least subjective locations. So you could, and then there's that. So I could either say that there's locations in the field of subjectivity, but that they're not occupied by anyone except just, the reaction between the 3 absolutes. Or I could say it's one of the 3 absolutes, or and that's 3 right there, and then 1 more there, and that's 4, and then holy crap. And so this just goes on and 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 on. And I could literally waste my entire life doing this, but the point of it is that we always get to make these choices, and the choices that we make are going to determine our lives. And the lives that we live are a reflection of what we've chosen to value above all other things. And in that way, every life is an example of sin, because none of us value everything infinitely, because then we wouldn't be able to choose anything over anything, and then we wouldn't be able to live. So we can choose to draw these distinctions in the way that we draw them, but if we don't draw any distinctions, then we either say everything is valueless, and we basically withdraw into nihilism, and we claim everything is valueless, or we say that everything is infinitely valuable, and we rejoice in everything being the way that it already is, and that would be like samadhi, which was my favorite. And we can choose to change at any time while we're alive. I don't know if we can change it after we're dead, but I know we can change it while we're alive. And then our lives are a reflection of our choices, of what we chose to value above all other things. Some of us have valued work above all other things, and so then we'll have great careers, but no one to share it with, and then it won't really matter. And then we could choose, instead of valuing our careers and maybe money, or actually, even that's an alternative. If we only value money, then instead of a career, well, then we're not going to kiss ass, and we're not going to stay for 8 hours every day after work. But we're going to work as little as possible, but we're going to work smart, and we're going to make the most money that we can, and we're going to invest in finances and be an investor. And so then you will make lots of money, but in so doing, you become George Soros, and you don't have any room for anything else in your life. Now, you might have a personal life, but it's diminished and overshadowed by your financial life, for example. Someone, not him. I don't know him, but I'm just saying as an example that everyone can kind of already kind of get the gist of what I'm saying. Because nobody knows who anybody else is really. If you know of the person personally, then I guess you could be like, well, that's not really true. But for the rest of us that don't know him, then we can use his name as a boogeyman image, even though he is not his name. And whoever he is totally separate from anything that I can say about him and me, vice versa, in relation to anyone else. So it's like that with all of us. So we make up stories about each other and we say, I believe that this is who this person is. Well, by making that choice of saying that I believe that that's who that person is, then I've already determined what the relationship has to be, or at least the constraints on it. And so then I make certain things impossible and I make other things possible. And that will slowly and gradually warp my life into what it is. And that is a reflection or a testimony to God, really, about what I personally found valuable during the course of my life. And it's all, at least with me, it's very easy to see what it is. It's this. I value this constant quest for more and more information at all costs. And I will do anything and everything to get it, and I'll just keep doing it, and I'll just keep getting more of it, and I'll just keep compiling and integrating all this information until I get to a point where I become satisfied with it. And then when I finally get done with that and I'm satisfied with it, I'll either have already died with it incomplete, at which point my life is a failure, and I didn't, dedicate enough of my time to it to make sure that it got completed. Or if I do complete it, then its use will then be a thing unto itself, because I've never really wondered that deeply about what's going to happen if anybody ever finds this. Are they ever going to misuse it, or are they ever going to use it for good, or what is it going to get used for? And like I said, it's possible that it could build people. And if it does that, then I don't even know what that could mean. It could mean that the human species will get projected into the next era and we end up closer to the Sams, and we're able to travel faster than light, and we have super intelligent AGI units running around all over the place, and everything is this explosion of dynamic curiosity and exploration and technological advancement and all of that. And hopefully that's where things end up, and I end up becoming immortal and conquesting out all over throughout the universe in different galaxies and raising species over here and species over there and letting them choose what they will. And so it's all so diverse that the ability for all these different viewpoints can arise. And then that is so enriching that we end up finding the actual answer that interweaves throughout all of them. Because if you think about it, parallax, the greatest parallax is the greatest distance between the two pieces of the satellite, right? So if I allow the greatest amount of freedom, then I allow the greatest distance of parallax, which allows the greatest resolution, which allows the shortest amount of time and the greatest amount of efficiency and optimization to getting the final answer, at which point we crystallize. So I'm trying to focus on the theoretical side of that, because that's what I've spent most of my life doing, and it's easy, and it's just logical deduction. But if I try to do anything else, like with physics or with subjectivity and theory, or not theory, art, or a religion or anything like that, it's going to tank because that's outside my field. I can project my own hypotheses into it, but that's just a relativistic image of it. It won't fit exactly. It can sort of lay a ambiguous kind of a vague idea about what the subjective field could be or how it might operate, but it won't ever formalize it into a system where it's like, I can manipulate your soul. It might get developed to that point, but by then I would hope that the field of relativity would be so well established that people would know better, because they'd be like, well, yeah, but all relations go back to the field of relativity and the laws of logic and rationale. And if you break that, you will pay the consequences for it. That's just the way it is. Now, given the idea of karma to start from, and then launching off of that would give us just enough of a tether to, I would say, math or some way of abstractly measuring our relations to ensure that those relations are good, that they're valid, that they're integrated. And it allows us to integrate all diverse thoughts so that, I hope, instead of it being the opposite, where it constrains everything into it and it tries to absorb everything into itself, I'm hoping what it does is it just acts as a bridge in between a bunch of different viewpoints, so that you could translate the rationale of a Hindu and translate that to Christianity. And you'll just treat the religions like they're languages, and compare the languages and just translate one word for another. And you'll start to develop, oh yeah, that's the same concept with a different name. Or these are two completely different concepts because there's like saudade. There's words that exist only in one language and they don't get shared in the other language. It does happen. It happens a lot. And that's another reason that we need as many languages as possible, because we need that diversification to find the commonalities between them so that we can understand how to integrate the entire unit. So given that, I think that's what my life should be about. Because if I try to delve too much time into God, I'm going to deviate off of that and I'm going to start spilling over and doing some weird shit. And if I had tried to become a physicist this late in life, I don't have the discipline. I just don't. I am going to just stick with the logical field. And the theory will be presented as such, and it will have its own images of what subjectivity is. But that won't be subjectivity. It will just say that it's nothing. So I don't even touch the subject. And I just say, that's beyond this theory. That's something that you just subjectively come up with as a subject. Being a subject, you will have subjective experiences, and that's how you'll get your axioms. But I'm not going to even attempt to explain that. But I will tell you what you can do with those axioms once having found them or chosen them. They will go through this chain of cascading causality and eventually manifest into these forms. And so then you'll be able to at least tell what the effect of having chosen those axioms will be, and that will kind of lighten the paths of effects of where those lead. Now, that can be a hindrance, it could be a curse or a blessing, it just depends. Now, if you look at the effects and you're like, I'm going to change my axiom because I don't like that effect that it eventually has, that is another problem, because it's like, no, you can't make a subjective decision based off objective information or even relative information. You have to make subjective decisions based off subjective feelings alone, irrespective and irregardless of relativity, logic, reason, empiricism. all goes out the window, and you will only have your feelings and your own intuition about what you should do, which axioms you choose. And that way it's left fully open. And so if the theory makes a technical foul and it assumes that there is no such thing as the subjective field, or it says that the entire subjective field is empty and void because it can't see anything in it because it's too small to see for logic, then it all the better, because it won't be able to tell you how to calculate the right subjective answer, quote unquote. It will just tell you what the effect is, but it won't tell you how to reach those causes. Now, the final bit of the whole paradigm would be that. It would be, how do you subjectively evaluate which axioms to choose, irregardless of their effects? Because what I'm talking about is pure science and math. It has nothing to do with your soul. So then we're looking at waiting for Christ to fill that in. Because I'm not Christ. I don't want to touch that. That's something that a religious messiah would have to come out with and say, this is how you can evaluate your axioms. And that's for religious leaders and messianic figures to deal with, because that's beyond my realm. I don't have any business with that. If somebody chooses to assert one assertion over the other, then that's their choice, and they should be free to be able to make that choice. And I can't really determine how that would be best done. I could say, for the record, I guess, if anybody's listening to this, that if you wanted to know what my subjective reasoning is behind why I chose relativity, is because I trust logic more than I trust anything else. I trust logic and deductive reasoning more than I trust the physical world or the subjective world. And the reason is because when I was raised by my parents, they would arbitrate things and not give me a reason as to why, or they would contradict themselves, or they would make no rational sense, but I guess from a subjective sense it felt right for them. That's what they felt was the right thing to do. But it didn't sit right with me, and yet there wasn't really a way that I knew of that I could get them to understand things from my perspective. And now that I think about it back, I can't get myself to understand theirs. So I wanted a way for them, mostly for them, to understand me. And so then I kept delving into logic, because I was like, logic is the same for everyone. Everyone knows what logic is. So I just kept developing it, because I felt that you couldn't have any justice without logic. If you were going to claim that something was just, that you had to have a logically deductive reasoning rationalizing that and saying, this is why that makes sense. This is why that's the logical reason. And if you didn't have that and you just arbitrarily, offhandedly said something and felt it all the way, fine, you feel it, okay, great, I don't doubt that. But yet it's totally irrational, and I can't follow you where you're at, then it doesn't really do me any good. And I wasn't really able to make much value or use out of most of the stuff that I heard from my parents because of that reason. I couldn't justify their assertions because they made their assertions subjectively, arbitrarily, off the cuff, loosey-goosey, with zero thought and only feelings, either in a drunken rage or in a psychopathically obsessive, compulsive, anxiety-ridden, control freak need to reduce everything to either what they find comfortable or what they don't find comfortable, and everything else gets disregarded. So for me, logic was the only mediator that really made any sense, and the only thing that I could use to justify everything without saying the same thing that they said. Because they say, well, I feel like this is right, and that's why I chose to do what I did. But then both of you feel differently than the other one does, that was the most marked difference for me as a kid, was seeing one parent say something and another parent say something else. And yet when I ask them why, both of them tell me the same thing, but yet they got two different results from the same method. So it's like, I can't understand that. How can you both say that, well, I did what I felt was right, but you did opposite things? So how are you able to come to that feeling? And which feeling is the right feeling? Because they're different feelings, they're not the same. So which one is the right one? And none of those ideas really made any sense to me. But what did make sense was, if it was rationalized, if it was put to me in a way where I could follow the logic inescapably, then it just was what it was. And then I could accept it, and it could be made sense of. And it made sense to me, and it made sense to them, and it made sense to everybody. But the moment that we deviated from that and went into this subjective realm where it was just, well, I feel like this is the right thing to do, then I can't necessarily follow that. I don't know exactly what it is that made them feel like that, other than a disregard for anything that I felt, because that didn't seem to be taken into the equation literally ever. There were times when they would be like, well, I'm going to try my ass off to see you. Yes, granted. It wasn't like they didn't care. It's just that it was like they never really bothered to put themselves in my shoes, is what I felt like. Did they? I don't know. No one will ever know that. But I didn't feel like they had. I did not feel understood, still don't to this day. And I guess no one does. And that's another problem that I see rampant in society. And I think that that could be solved if people used logic and reason to back up why they do what they do. And that way the kid can follow the same instrument that the parent does. You don't have to be mature to be logical. You could be immature and childish and still be logical. You could be crazy and still be logical. All that's required for logic to make sense is that the conclusion necessarily follows from its premises, without any logical fallacies, which are relatively easy to see. And once you learn them, then you know all the rules, and that's it. And they don't change, and they're the same for everyone. But subjectivity always changes, and it's kind of ineffable. There's not really a way of explaining how to arrive at a feeling. You just have a feeling, or you don't. And I didn't have the same feelings that my parents did, and I still don't. And I still look at what they did as being wrong. And I feel like I would never be a good parent if I did what they did. And so, or didn't do what they should have done. So, my feeling is one way. Their feelings, because they both had different feelings, are each different from each other and mine. And so all three of us all have our own feelings about all the stuff that had happened, and yet it was the same thing that happened to all of us. So it's like, well, then I don't understand how, we're ever going to make any sense out of all this if we're all just stuck in our own rooms saying, well, I see the walls this color because we're all stuck in our own room and we've never been in each other's rooms to know what the other colors look like and why the other person keeps saying that everything looks like what they think is that color. Because they're in that room looking out of their window into someone else's room through tinted windows, and they don't realize they're tinted. They think that the windows are translucent and clear, and that the walls are painted, and that I'm painted, and why is everything all that same color? Well, because the color of the window that you're looking through is that color, not because of anything in the room. And then it's like, well, if I can't get in your room and see what everything looks like from that perspective, then I can't understand you. And the only way that I know how to make it into someone else's room is to go out of my room and into the hallway that connects all of the rooms together. And then go into the hallway and move toward their room and then knock on their door and hopefully they answer and then I get in. But if I can't get into the hallway and they just expect me to jump through the window, I can't do that without breaking it. So it's not going to do anyone any good to break all these windows and jump in and out of each other's rooms and break into each other's stuff. It's not going to make us better people. What we have to do is go out into the hallway first and then move over to the other person's room so we can enter it from the hallway, not jump through the window, breaking the window on the way through, at which point we're going to slit our own throats and bleed out on the floor without ever being able to see what the room looked like. So there's no way of putting my soul in their subjective location or vice versa. The only way that we have to bridge one from the other is through logic. If we don't have logic and we just shout that we're right and they're wrong, then it's just a shouting match over who can shout the loudest and the longest and the most often. And that doesn't prove anything. That's just a waste of time. And that, I think, is why I really needed to build this book, is so that I could build an understanding between myself and other people, and hopefully, ostensibly, between all people, so that all people can use logic and access it the same way, and then we all get equal access to the same opportunities, and we can trust each other, and hopefully, finally, understand each other, and get to the same conclusions as each other. Because that's the only way we can really do that, is through logic. Feelings are not going to get us there, unless our feelings are mutually beneficial. If our feelings are good, trusting, okay, yeah, those will help, but not the rage and the irritation and the the distrust and the suspicion and the envy and rage and disgust and horror and fear and loathing and all of that stuff. That's not going to get us there. What's going to get us there is faith and hope and happiness and joy and gratitude. And those things are going to help us integrate. And so where do we get those feelings? Well, we choose to look at the world like that and each other like that. And if we see the divine in someone else and give them the benefit of the doubt, I believe that that is how we will love each other as Jesus loved his disciples, is by giving them that trust, even if we know they're going to break it, and we still give it to them. Even if we know they don't deserve it, still forgive them. Even if we know that they're in the wrong, then we defend them, or at the very least we don't accuse them. And we can say statements of fact. John, you're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows. Oh no, Jesus, I would never do that, and then he does it. So it's like, yeah, you could state facts, but you can't accuse someone of something. He didn't say, and you're a bad person for it, and go kill yourself because you suck. That's not what Jesus said. He just said a statement of fact. You're going to deny me 3 times. That's just the way it is, John. Sorry, that's just the way it's going to be. It's a fact. That's just the way it is. That's my prediction. That's how it's going to happen. And then, lo and behold, the prediction manifests into physical reality, and yes, indeed, it is a fact. So it wasn't I don't consider it to be an accusation. I consider it, because I consider Jesus to be Christ, I don't consider it to be an accusation. I don't think he accused John. I think he predicted a fact because he developed such a subtle intuition that his intuition was guided by God. And because his intuition was guided by God, he could derive facts about the future before they ever manifested without using logic, just skipping. But you see, he was Jesus. I don't expect that. I don't expect people to be able to just develop their subjective intuition that well. The best that I can do is to try to parrot what he said, is that you have to have faith. Because if you don't have any faith, you can't move mountains, you can't get past things, you can't trust that the other person's going to listen to you, so you won't bother saying it. You won't reach your hand out for a handshake because you're afraid they'll cut it off. Well, then you're never going to shake their hand, and then they're not going to be your friend, and so then you're going to have problems. So I think as long as we don't judge or accuse each other, then we'll be okay. And those are logical relativistic laws that I extracted from the Bible and mostly Jesus. But that's the best that my theory can do. All it can do is look for commonalities, and that's all it should do, and that's okay if that's all it does.